I have literally nothing to base this on, but I've gotten the notion in my head that Zelda Breath of the Wild is solely responsible for ushering us into this new era where the climbing game is establishing itself as a distinct genre in the zeitgeist. Which feels strange to say because I can't say that any particular climber that I've played is trying to be like Zelda either. The games that are copying Zelda can usually be identified by the inclusion of a gliding mechanic and points of interest far in the distance. The kind of copycat drive that led all climbing in AAA video games look and feel like the Uncharted series, so much that it came to be one of the staple spices in the Sony Prestige developers' cabinet. And it isn't like games about climbing didn't exist beforehand either, they usually came in two kinds. First, games that were metaphorically about climbing, games like Journey and Celeste, where not only the act of climbing was meant as a metaphor for different feelings or life lessons, yet amazingly the actual gameplay itself being a metaphor for the act of climbing. Celeste is a platformer where jumping takes the place of climbing, and Journey is a walking simulator with some flying and gliding mixed in. The Ludens isn't about climbing. Second are the Bennett Foddy-esque Rage games. Chained Together is a clearly Foddy-inspired platforming game about climbing out of hell, but it's ludically about jumping and cooperative multiplayer. Foddy's own Baby Steps is a game mostly about climbing through the ludens of walking very meticulously, but I would in fact call the verbs of getting over it an act of climbing. Yet all of these games are prioritizing the punishment, the affect of rage or comedy. All of the friction of the game comes from falling as a punishment. The priority is not on something else that makes video games engaging. That thing is developing mechanics that control well and feel good, then offering friction upon a foundationally fun verb. Let me defend this a bit. Falling games do not have to be defined by being punishing games. Gravity Rush is a game where falling is transformed into a mechanic that allows the player to fly, slide, and eat pavement in a way that is easy to grasp, hard to master, and encourages mastery through challenge, encouraging skill at the game primarily through how good it feels to move, even iterating on the concept by adding low and high gravity variable movesets in the second game. That's what I'm looking for when I say I want to see developers take a verb and turn it into a video game-ass video game. Which brings me back to climbing. Let's talk about two games that do just this. Toussaint and Cairn. Toussaint is a game that is clearly taking some inspiration from Journey, with its story arc and its spherical blip-based interactions with the world, as well as walking simulators or Fallout, by delivering the vast majority of its story through optional notes scattered about the tower. But the friction of the game mechanics are what I'm most interested in. Just like how Breath of the Wild gives friction to its ability to climb anywhere and anything by limiting you with its stamina bar, encouraging players to climb until the very end of the bar and jump for your life if the top is just out of reach, Toussaint is a stamina management game where both usable stamina and max stamina are constantly draining, encouraging the player to solve the problem of how to ascend and execute as quickly as possible. Where your typical Sony Prestige title uses climbing as an interstitial action between the main gameplay or as a vehicle for controlling cinematic moments, the distinct handholds of Toussaint require the player to really study the environment and make a plan to have the best chance of success, while still being forgiving. A single button is all you need to catch your breath and recover a bit of active stamina. By remixing these two systems, designed to create ease of use, by mixing in constant friction, the levels of Toussaint become physically tangible. That tangibility emphasized even more by the unique controller mechanics of reaching with the analog stick and grabbing with either the left or right triggers, mapped to your own left and right hands. Cairn takes this kind of friction to the extreme. At first, Cairn seriously confused me, mainly in that I didn't expect a game like this from the Game Bakers. I have been following this studio's work for years and have videos up on my channel for both their previous games, Fury and Haven. The Game Bakers are that rare studio that never make the same game twice and never make a bad game either. Cairn is an angry game. The player? Maybe. The main character, though? Definitely. I was floored when I loaded up the Cairn demo and saw literal rock climbing handholds, as well as a series of rock climbing problems of various difficulties. For a moment there, I entirely forgot that there was an actual mountain to go climb when I saw my opportunity to go bouldering myself. So you can imagine how I became intimately familiar with the game's movement system. Rather than going for a universal stamina that dictates all movements, Cairn splits your stamina across each of your MC's 4 limbs, intuitively demonstrating fatigue and danger when her limbs start violently shaking. Any new weightlifter knows this muscular tremor, which I appreciate seeing as I am currently a personal trainer in training. That shake comes from a couple of things. First is your neuromuscular system trying to build the neuron pathways to achieve the movement. If you've never performed a squat underweight and suddenly start signaling parts of your thigh muscles that barely get used, those muscle cells don't really know how to respond to such a strong electrical impulse from the nerve. So they twitch and shake out of sequence. But as you keep squatting, you don't just make the muscle fiber stronger, you make your neurons more efficient about which muscles to recruit and when. The second kind of muscular shake is what the heroine of Cairn is experiencing, a shake born out of desperation. As she is clearly already a trained rock climber, her shaking is the result of experiencing muscle fatigue under tension. If you're pushing with all your might and your muscle's Golgi tendon organ isn't feeling that pressure alleviate, your nervous system will begin to panic, sending stronger and stronger signals to recruit more muscle fibers, while the muscle gives weaker and weaker signals in return, causing twitching, spasms, and cramping when your electrolytes run out and the parasympathetic nervous system can't signal the muscle to relax. This is your neuromuscular system fighting for survival, instinctively knowing that failing to move means death, even if your brain knows there is a perfectly safe crash pad 5 meters below you or a rope pulled taut to allow you to safely hang before rappelling to the ground. Games like Breath of the Wild and Jusant handle these animations like you're running out of breath on a brisk jog. And when you get a wee bit winded, you go, oh well, I'll just fall to my death, I guess. Zelda and Jusant make the world tangible while climbing, but Cairn makes climbing visceral. I can feel her muscles the same way I feel mine. Cairn also has the stamina recovery button, but it seemingly only lets you rest one limb at a time while still testing the position and endurance of the rest of your body. So I can understand when even after a minor fall, she starts yelling, cursing, and losing her shit. She is a person who I cannot imagine speaking the words, "That's okay, you did your best, now let's try again." Every failure is met with self-loathing and self-hatred. Any failure is unacceptable because she knows she's better than this. Any limit is unacceptable because she knows that the next challenge she's going to choose will be even deadlier than before. That any climb could be her last. Much like Jusant, a lot of Cairn's story is told with little notes in the environment, posters and brochures for kids' classes at her climbing club, newspaper clippings of professional mountain climbers that have died or gone missing, and how that speaks to the character and personalities of different mountains. Upon leaving the practice walls and heading out to a true rock face beyond the gym, the player quickly realizes that the mental game is going to be just as grueling. It is a gameplay system where the friction can actively be managed through the pragmatic knowledge of actual rock climbing, of which I have none. While I have been aware of Jusant and Cairn for some time, I have to say that I wasn't very proactive about it. There wasn't anything giving me that fire that inspires me to seek out a new experience. It was serendipity that led me here. I have over the past couple years become very interested in reading comics on Webtoon, primarily as a way to stop wasting so much free time on social video sites and nonsense mobile games, mostly sticking to my tried and true interests like superhero or shonen action, martial arts, boxing, and Murin stories, light-hearted rom-coms. Yet as the series that I was reading wrapped or lost my interest, I recently began spreading out into other stories about sports, as a way to maintain my motivation while pursuing my personal trainer certification. It was then that Webtoon recommended me Dead Point. The titular Dead Point is the moment at a zenith of a parabolic arc, when the momentum that brings a body into the air dissipates, but just before gravity begins to accelerate your body back toward the ground, grabbing a hold during a jump outside of the dead point, resulting in all of that linear momentum to convert into angular momentum, either whipping your body to crash into the wall, risking severe injury, or bouncing and swinging your body away from the wall, likely outside the angles at which you can maintain your grip on the narrow ledge, sending you falling back down once again. Ironically meaning there are only two safe places to be during a climb, at the bottom of the wall on flat ground, and inside the dead point. Yet beyond being a manhwa about teaching the fundamentals of sport climbing, Dead Point manages to be a compelling story about how trauma and fear can hold a person back from achieving their goals, the main character suffering from a visual hallucination of a metaphorical barrier in the sky that measures and limits the height of your achievements. A barrier that perhaps her mother could also see before she died in a tragic fire rescue operation. But she doesn't just see her own talent ceiling. She can see the ceilings of others as well, her life of constantly comparing herself to others acting as a constant friction, one that discourages her from ever attempting to climb the zenith of her ability, to never go beyond her limit of a mere 4-meter climb. I began reading Dead Point a few weeks before Jusant came to PlayStation Plus, not sponsored, and the Cairn demo went live. And as I jumped into these games, I was so heavily interested in seeing how these games translated the verb of climbing into ludens. So much so that I lost track of seeking meaning in the mechanics. The frustrated screaming of Cairn's heroine waking me up from that stupor. For most of gaming's lifetime, climbing has been a transitional thing. It has been an almost passive way of breaking up the monotony of other tried and true gameplay genres. Things like puzzles, shooting, and stealth, but due to whatever limitations, few games stopped to consider the value that comes from transition and the struggle therein. A game about climbing is always going to be a metaphor of struggle and of overcoming, of failure and of falling. Now we finally have games that mechanically understand that value comes from striving for the summit, not just in reaching it. Thank you for watching, everyone. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to the channel. The vast majority of my viewers still aren't subscribed, but it would really help me out if you did. Talk to you next time, take care of yourselves, and stay true. What makes a man turn neutral? Lust for gold? Power? Or are they just born with a heart full of neutrality? I hate these filthy neutrals. With enemies, you know where they stand, but with neutrals, who knows? It sickens me. This book is a comparative exploration of two unlikely games, Steel Rising and Lies of P. Both released in 2023, both set in pivotal moments of French history, both games inspired by the games Dark Souls and Bloodborne by acclaimed studio From Software. Both stories about robots centered around the motif of puppetry and dolls. Both stories about the human spirit and what it means to be a real person. Stories inspired by Italian cultural touchstones like Commedia dell'arte and Pinocchio, yet vastly different in scope and execution. Steel Rising was widely panned by critics, while Lies of P is widely praised as the best Souls-like to be made by a non-From Software studio. While both a kind of science fiction, one of these games is a historical fantasy and the other a historical fiction. Yet what does it mean for a video game story to be either? Because of that question, both of these games share a very similar problem. Modern game development has a problem. Video games are considered an entertainment medium, one that is mostly for children. To reach maturity as an art form, games and their developers had to expand the medium into deep, affecting, and unique narratives that can only be accomplished by ludonarrative, by writing a story through authoring an experience. For decades, the goal has been to demonstrate to the broadest possible audience an ability to have culturally important stories. Stories like Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, Invisible Man, To Kill a Mockingbird, or Isaac Asimov's I, Robot. Stories that mean something to people because they can see their real values and their struggles reflected in fiction. Games accomplish this feat every year. What kinds of stories are culturally important today? After a brief respite from the wars of the 20th century, today's culture is one defined by increasing political turmoil. The struggles of one's nation and the international stage have entered the home. They are our personal struggles. We have entered into the era of an anti-civil rights movement. The smallest and most vulnerable scapegoats have been exaggerated to the fate of society itself by politicians whose true motives are merely to empower and enrich themselves by convincing society to champion its own collapse. The deep stories that will be remembered by history will be the stories that speak to this personal political upheaval. Narrative-centered games clearly want to have this kind of place in history, as everything from Call of Duty and Assassin's Creed to boutique stories like Detroit Become Human market themselves around historical and political intrigue. Yet we are also in a time where being labeled political is a pejorative that will usher in waves of criticism and boycotts before even a second of the game has been seen by the public. Everything is woke and evil until a week after release, then it's old news. It is fascinating, then, that some game developers would first be doggedly inspired by history, culture, and politics while making a game, only to censor themselves the moment people start looking at the final product. What drives a game to raise its hands and cry apolitical? What drives a game to censor whole schools of philosophy from commenting when seeking publicity? What drives a game to be so politically inspired only to censor itself at the midnight hour? This is All Puppets Are Bastards. Liberty and Labor in the Age of AI. L'union fait la force.